Hello, this is Mish, and welcome to another WestWorld review. This one was for Season 1, Episode 7. The title of this was called Trompe L'Oeil. I think I've said that right. So before I get started, this is going to contain spoilers. So if you've not watched the episode, go and watch it, and then come back to this video. So before we get started, I want to talk about the name of this episode. So I'm sure when I say Trompe L'Oeil, French people roll their eyes in disgust at my pronunciation. But anyway, did a bit of research on that. And what that actually means, the English translation of that is deceive the eye. So it's used in art a lot. So it's a technique where you use, an art technique to change the imagery of a piece of art to create an optical illusion or a forced perspective. So if something which I've seen that uses a technique like this is if you've seen the people that do the chalk drawings on footpaths and stuff like that, every now and again you see one which makes it look like there's a big hole in the footpath. That is this type of thing that we're talking about here around the art. So I just thought that was an interesting point because in this entire show there's so many things that could be a deceive the eye technique because everywhere we're looking we've got misdirections and crazy things going on. But for this episode, I thought it was very relevant and obviously chosen on purpose. And I think it's a reference to Bernard more than anything else. So anyway, let's get started talking about the characters. So let's get rid of the easy characters. We've got four main things happening with this episode. So four main story arcs. Let's get the easy ones out of the way first. Let us start with Maeve and Clementine. So we see Maeve once again go into her loop. But remember, last episode, she had that massive boost of intelligence. So she is obviously paying attention to everything going on around her. So she has a conversation with Clementine, which is played out before. And she's remembering what she said before, so she's predicting the conversation. Doesn't really faze Clementine so much, obviously, because she is not aware of what's going on. Then we see everything freeze, and Clementine is taken away. Then we see Maeve must be shot. Maeve died somehow, and she's gone back to the laboratory. So she goes back, and Felix is working on her as normal. So we see, he manages to usher out the other person who is assisting him, and then she wakes up, and she says she wants to find where has Clementine gone. So they go on a bit of a trip around the facility, trying to find her, because Felix couldn't find her, but Maeve could. So we see at that point, there's more that goes on around Clementine because she is the example that I guess gets Bernard fired. So we see, Clementine getting her, I guess, not necessarily wiped, the data not wiped, but actually her data being destroyed. So we see there, I guess, they're calling it a lobotomy. But really, it's just a physical wipe of destroying the actually inside of her brain mechanism there. So we see also that Maeve sees that happen. And she's obviously quite upset because although she knows that it's a host, she still has that, I guess, intelligence to understand that, it's almost a friend. So we see her pretty upset by that. Then she says, they managed to get her back in to, they're going to put her back into her loop. And she says, I want to escape. So she is threatening the two guys, Felix and Sylvester, to, get me out of here. Help me get out of here. So it will be fascinating to see where that goes. But it was quite a small little thing. It was just more character building around Maeve and what she's going to do and her will to leave that place. Okay, let's now move on to William and Dolores. Once again, quite short with these guys. Got a lot of character development, but not a lot actually happening. So we see them on the train still, actually getting on with Lawrence quite nicely, having a bit of a card game with him. And he's actually, even though he does betray and backstab everyone, his actual intentions seem to be quite positive somewhere in there. So we see them, going through a place where they say it's the Ghost Nation. So they lock down the train, travel through the area, and while that's happening, while the lockdown, we see more character development from William and Dolores. So we see William saying that he was pretty much a bookworm, he lived in books, and this is a representation of that. Him in another book trying to find the end. So that does parallel a little bit with the Man in Black, but for me, that's a side note. I still think that I don't know if William is the Man in Black. But we see them, I guess, William tell Dolores that he has someone in the outside world, and Dolores obviously takes off very upset, but yet he kind of turns around and they still advance their relationship more. And we see that, I guess, his reasoning behind that, he says to her, how can I go on pretending when I know what this feels like? So I guess he's suggesting there that he's not happy. Whilst he has achieved what he wanted in his life, he's never been who he wants to be. So that was cool to see his character develop like that, and their relationship grow, as I did predict that they're going to get to the point where they're going to want to say that they're in love, even though one is a host and one is a guest. But anyway, we see a bit later on that the train gets ambushed by the Confederale, and we see them escape. So we have William, Dolores, and Lawrence escape on horseback, and they manage to get saved by the Ghost Nation, taking out the Confederale, which is quite a lucky situation. Then we see that Lawrence goes off one way to continue on with doing what he's doing with the explosives, and we see William and Dolores going another direction, because Dolores actually drew that landscape. So that's the way that they need to go. And once again, we're getting that sense of Dolores being driven by something she doesn't understand. So, looking at the Maze flashbacks, the kind of the voice, Arnold's voice, was it Arnold which told her about that, to do that? We don't know. But anyway, so we're getting a split there. So William and Dolores going to do their own thing, and Lawrence do his own thing. I assume it's probably the end of what we'll see with Lawrence for this part in this timeline. But yeah, if you don't understand what I'm referring to about timelines, if you've not watched my theories around timelines, I guess a quick overview. I think there's multiple timelines going on here. We have William, Dolores, and Lawrence in one timeline. We have Dolores by herself in another timeline, and we also have the Man in Black, and the rest of the park in that same timeline as the Man in Black. But anyway, okay, so let's move on to the main pith of what happened in this episode, and it was pretty amazing. So it's all, I guess, the main part here is we're talking about Bernard, Teresa, and Ford. So we see, I guess the intro scene is really a Bernard scene about him reading to his son, and interesting points around the starting here where we have hints that things are gonna be quite mysterious around Bernard. So we see the reading the Alice in Wonderland story. And there's a quote which they talk about a little bit, which is, everything would be what it isn't. And, his son kind of repeats it back to him. Then we see him, I guess fade to, it was a dream sequence. But after that dream sequence, we kind of see another dream sequence where I guess he fades to another, him interviewing somebody, but the line kind of crosses and he says it to himself. And he says, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? So in essence, that was targeted at himself as opposed to him interviewing a host. So yeah, that was pretty cool. I quite like that. When I kind of rewatched those scenes, it was more, whilst I did pick up on them initially, when you rewatch it, some things stand out much greater than they did initially, which is pretty cool. So we also see, Bernard interviewing a host there, trying to understand if he's, the whole, are these hosts, I guess, evolving, figuring out consciousness, and also just doing the general checks that they do. And we see someone pop in there to say this host is being requested by management, and he questions that person to see, have you seen Elsie? And he returns to her saying she's started her leave. So that is something I want to talk about. I'll talk about that later, but yeah, pretty intriguing twist there. So we see things evolve around Bernard and Teresa. So we see them talking. There's a bit of back and forth there around the previous conversations around Ford. Then we see that Gail, who, if you remember, she's on the board. She requests Teresa to come to a meeting with her. And it's a pretty weird scenario that she walks in on. But anyway, we see her say a few things that we need to get rid of Ford. That's the kind of the gist of what the conversation is about. And she says, the most important line there, she's saying, but the gods require a blood sacrifice. So we think when she's saying that, in that scene, that it's not literal, that it's more of a we need to fire somebody. We need to show everyone here. We need to set an example. Not so much an actual, killing. So we see Gail and Teresa going forward, setting the scene to, I guess, trap Ford and Bernard. So let's talk about that scene. So we see, Ford and Bernard turn up to this, presentation, they call it, and we see that Clementine, remember she was taken out of the park, they prove a point here that after she's beaten, they've reset her, but she doesn't reset properly. Then she manages to defend herself and kill the other host. Now, the thing is here that we see that Bernard, in theory, picks this scene apart. I think the point where he picks it apart would be that they've simulated the host to be a guest, and I think that's probably a big standout point there. That kind of breaks their code anyway. So anyway, we see, that Gail turns around to fire Bernard. And at that point, we're thinking, well, that Ford should have stepped up. And he had a real evil little grin as well. I don't know if you picked up on that, but I definitely did when that was going on. I knew something was a bit funny. I knew that he's an intelligent man, and if he thought he was threatened, he would have been able to get out of the situation anyway. So at that point, I started thinking something's going on here. Then we see that Bernard then, I guess, approaches Teresa again, saying, that presentation was flawed. The real problem is Ford, and he kind of goes back to that whole situation about trying to get her to look at Ford. So we see now that that he also mentions to her that we know you did the satellite. You put the satellite in the host, and she says it doesn't really matter, I guess because he's fired, and also because she thinks she has the backing of the board at that point. But anyway, we see that he leads her out to the 2 Sector 17. So we also see that scene where they enter the little cottage. Now, I picked up on this in a previous episode where Bernard enters that room, and to the right there is no door, and all of a sudden we see Ford appear. Now, I mentioned that to me is a suggestion of the simulation, because that situation never happened. It could never happen. He doesn't just materialize. But now that kind of really makes sense. So we see that Bernard can't see the door. And this is a suggestion we've seen a few times throughout this TV show, that the hosts cannot see what is harmful to them. So if someone shows them a picture of I guess, an outside world location, they won't be able to understand it, and they won't be able to see it. It's just nothing. So that's what happened with the door. So that makes sense as to why Ford turned up in the previous episode like he did. So we see, at that point, I guess, obviously alarm bells are going off. Bernard is a host. But he didn't understand it at that point, and neither did she. I guess she just thought he wasn't looking in the right location. So they go downstairs, and they see that Ford has a little laboratory there, and he's making hosts. A slow process, but it is working. Then we see that Ford turns up, and things get really tricky. And it was fantastic acting by Anthony Hopkins. It just reminds me of all the Hannibal Lecter movies. Going from a point where he seems like a kind of eccentric, a really intelligent person, to all of a sudden being so threatening and ominous. It's fantastic. That scene and the music, it was really good. It was quite an amazing turnaround for a character like that. All of a sudden, from this kind of jovial, eccentric person to a cold-blooded killer, pretty much. So we see as well, I guess it has a fantastic conversation between them before that actually eventuates. So we see that, Ford saying consciousness is a burden, a weight, and that he's sparing the hosts that. So in here, they are free under his control, which is an interesting conversation point. You could argue that in a way he's definitely right, that consciousness, if you don't have that, then you're not going to have guilt and all that kind of other issues that are going to come from that. And they can reset, and the memory, someone else is controlling the memories. But I mean, on the side of him saying that, why does he make Bernard suffer so much if he's saying all that stuff? Because Bernard is traumatized by losing his son. But I thought that was an interesting parallel between them. Him saying one thing and doing another. But anyway, so we see that I guess they have this a good conversation. But obviously Teresa is not in a good situation at all. And we see Bernard is confirmed the host. Ford shuts him down and then orders him to kill her, and that is the end of Teresa. But yeah, fantastic scene. Went really dark very quickly. I enjoyed it, and once again, acting by Anthony Hopkins is amazing. He's always all his movies have always been fantastic. So yeah, what do we? I guess things to talk about with this episode. There are a lot, but I guess the main point is probably obviously Bernard and him being a host. One thing that I will say though is that in that situation, I mean, we know Bernard is a host. But then a lot of people have suggested that is Bernard a host and Arnold, I guess a host version of Arnold. So Arnold looked like Bernard, then Bernard, the host version, has been built on him, and maybe his consciousness is being transferred. I think we've got confirmation that that is not happening. Because in that situation where he's going to kill Teresa, he's not going to, I guess Ford isn't going to lie. And he turned around to say, she said to Ford, "Is this how you dispatched Arnold?" And he said, well, Bernard was not around then. So for me, that is confirmation that Bernard is not related to Arnold physically. The look of Bernard seems to be designed. We see the design pictures, and it's definitely, that is Bernard. But whether or not we're still seeing maybe a part of Bernard that Ford wants to make like Arnold as a memory or something that he relates to, maybe. I mean, Bernard is definitely a tortured host soul, you could say, but maybe Ford likes that because it reminds him of Arnold. But visually, I don't think it is. It was quite elaborate though. That whole setup was, I guess, it proved to Teresa's staff what was happening, and maybe that was the point. But once again, we don't know. We're not sure who is a host, who is a staff member. But yeah, it definitely fooled Teresa, and that was the goal, so it worked. But whether or not that was required, because the suggestion here as well, that point that Teresa and Gail, the conversation that they had when she said, "But the gods require a blood sacrifice," and we hear Ford repeat that same line back to her, which would imply that Gail is also a host. So that this is a whole massive elaborate thing which he set up, which makes sense because it all seemed to start with the conversation when they were at the where the wine was spilt. The conversation between Ford and Teresa where he was saying, you need to watch yourself, and she didn't. And obviously he's set up this whole elaborate system where tricks her into thinking the board has turned up, set up the keep going with Bernard leading her to that location, and confirming that she needs to go alone, and that there's a whole logic behind it. But it seems that it's quite elaborate, and is it required? Well, it could be there to fool her staff. But yeah, pretty elaborate, but pretty cool as well. I'm not saying in a negative way. I'm just saying it seemed to be over the top. Anyway, what other things did I pick up from this episode? Well, for me, who else is a host? That's the question here. And whilst I like where the show is going with this, it kind of annoys me a bit that it's such a misdirection that you can have, that now it's going to be questioning who is a host, who is a staff member, all the time. And also, it's going to add a lot of confusion around Bernard, because on one side we see that Bernard is actually, a host that is doing what he should do, and he's working away, and he's trying to resolve the issues and trying to investigate things. But then all of a sudden, now we're no longer sure as his intentions are still his original intentions, or is Ford telling him what to do. So it makes it quite confusing. It's going to be even more tricky to pick up what's going on, because once again, if all the staff members, half of them are hosts, well, this is going to be insane to try and pull this apart. But I guess that's what makes it fun. So one other thing I want to mention here is what happened to Elsie. So we see that, I guess, Bernard is still trying to figure out. He tries to find her on the map. He can't find her, tries to call her, can't find her. And obviously we got told there that she's now on leave. So what happened to her? Now we could say that possibly Ford told Bernard to take her out, which is kind of what I thought initially. And once again, I guess that situation now is complex, because Bernard would not do that of his own accord, but he would do that if obviously Ford told him to do that. So is it because she figured it out that he told Bernard to go and take her out? Once again, it's going to be a hard call, because it wouldn't be Ford, because Ford doesn't have the strength to take Elsie out like that, I believe. But it could be Bernard have taken her out, but we could be seeing other stuff here as well. I kind of get the inkling here that whoever's taken her, maybe she is not a host, and whoever's taken her is going to let her in on what's going on and the real story. So maybe she's going to be working against Ford. But yeah, I think I've said enough here. I've gone over the 20-minute mark, which is kind of my rule for these episodes, because I could just go on talking about this. But anyway, fantastic episode. I was really on the edge of my seat around the whole Bernard revelation and that scene where Ford turned into the evil Hannibal Lecter. Fantastic scene. Okay, so I'll leave this video here. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. And subscribe for future content from myself. And leave feedback below. I always read it. It's fantastic. I try to respond to it all, but obviously I get quite a lot on these videos, as everyone has an opinion, and that's fantastic. And once again, I do read them all. If I don't reply to you, I do apologize, but once again, I get quite a few. I will also endeavor to put out a new theories video, as those are always a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing them. I really enjoy reading the feedback around those. And I think whilst I still believe the simulation theory could exist, as we're seeing more, it's getting less and less likely. But still, it's a fun thing to talk about. All these theories are fantastic. Some of your guys' theories are amazing. It really is cool reading them. I really enjoyed. So until next time, this is Mesh, and I'll see you later.